In this module, we will learn about the dynamics in ADAS model, stability and convergence to long run steady state. In the earlier module, you have seen the derivation of expectation augmented aggregate demand AD and aggregate supply AS, Phillips curve and expectation augmented Phillips curve, and the relationship between actual rate of unemployment, natural rate of unemployment and inflation rate. In the real world, the prices are continuously rising. Therefore, to study the dynamics of inflation, we need to generalize ISLM model to incorporate rising inflation. As a result, we need to derive aggregate demand and aggregate supply under the dynamics of inflation and then study the long run equilibrium condition. In the long run, an economy would settle down to a specific combination of interest rate, income and inflation. The only point of argument that exists is the time it would take to obtain the equilibrium. Keynesian stream of thought would propose a long time for economy to reach long run equilibrium, while New Classical argue that the economy is so adjustable that it would settle to its long run equilibrium very fast. One common factor in both the schools of thoughts is that they both believe in the concept of equilibrium. An unplanned movement in inventories would bring about an equilibrium in inventories, leading to changes in output and employment. This adjustment mechanism occurs wherever there is short run equilibrium condition. In the long run, AS schedule becomes vertical as AS plays no role in determining income. This would effectively imply that fiscal or monetary policies play no role in determining income in long run. An explanatory monetary policy would not be able to lower the nominal interest and increase output. This module would incorporate the dynamics of inflation in aggregate demand AD and aggregate supply AS, thus describe the mechanism by which long run equilibrium and stability and equilibrium is attained. The module would go through the implications of demand side shocks and supply side shocks. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the need to incorporate dynamics of inflation in AD-AS schedules, to understand the derivation of AD curve using inflation modified ISLM framework, to comprehend the notion of overall equilibrium in the economy under inflation, to understand the long run steady state incorporating expected inflation, to identify the impacts of demand side shocks which affects AD curve, to identify the impacts of supply side shocks affecting AS curve. Let us commence our module with AD schedule under dynamics of inflation. In order to study dynamics of inflation, we need to study ISLM model, which is modified to capture persistent inflation. IS curve represents the goods market equilibrium. The goods market equilibrium is represented by the situation where leakages from the national income in the form of savings and taxes are equated to injections into the national expenditure in the form of investment and government expenditure. Let sum of savings and taxes, that is S plus T, be represented by R, and sum of investment and government expenditure, that is I plus G, be represented by T. Also assume natural log of R be ln R and natural log of T be ln T. Since savings depend on real income and investment depends on real income and real interest rates, their functional relationship in terms of natural logs can be written as follows. Log R is equals to beta naught plus beta 1 log Y. Log T is equals to beta 2 plus beta 3 log Y minus beta 4 into I minus pi E, where I minus pi E is in terms of levels, not logs. It is the gross inflation rate of return. R is the real rate of return and pi E is the expected rate of return or nominal rate of interest. I can be written as I is equals to R plus pi E. In equilibrium, leakages are equals to injections implying savings and taxes are set equal to investment and government expenditure. This gives the relationship between income and interest rates. Therefore, the IS schedule would look like log y is equals to alpha naught minus alpha 1 into I minus pi e. Alpha naught is equals to beta 2 minus beta naught by beta 1 minus beta 3, and alpha 1 is equals to beta 4 by beta 1 minus beta 3. Since the coefficients of I is minus alpha 1, the slope of IS curve is minus 1 by alpha 1. However, the IS curve is negatively sloped only if beta 1 is greater than beta 3. This implies that the response of savings to income be larger than that of investment to income. All the points lying on the right hand side of the IS curve are points representing excess supply in the goods market, while points lying on the left hand side are the points of excess demand in the goods market. All the points on the IS curve are the points where the goods market is in the equilibrium. An increase in expected inflation would leave the slope of IS curve same but will shift the IS schedule outwards. This change in goods market gets reflected in aggregate demand schedule, as the aggregate demand schedule denotes those combinations of real income and real interest rate where both goods and money market are in equilibrium. Let y represent natural log of real income. Alpha naught measures exogenous components of aggregate demand. Any change in alpha naught, which means a change in exogenous variables like change in fiscal policy, would bring about changes in IS schedule and further affects AD curve. This implies a rise in government expenditure which will shift IS schedule outwards without changing its slope. Moving on to LM curve, money market equilibrium. LM curve on the other hand reflects money market equilibrium. It deals with asset markets at a point in time. In money market equilibrium, demand for money is given by MD is equals to KY minus HI. Rewriting the previous equation in natural log form, M minus P is equals to alpha 2 log Y minus alpha 3I, where M is the natural log of nominal supply of money, P is the natural log of price level. Opportunity cost of holding real cash balances depends on the nominal rate of interest I. Let mu be the rate of growth of nominal money and pi be the rate of inflation. Cash balances grow at the rate of mu minus pi. As a result, LM schedule can be written as mu minus pi is equals to M minus P minus M minus P minus 1 and so on. M minus P minus 1 represents the real money demand in the last period, so that the right hand side of equation denotes growth of real balances. Substituting real demand equation in the previous equation, we get mu minus pi is equals to alpha 2 log y minus alpha 3I minus M minus P minus 1. The money market would be in the steady state where the real cash balances are constant with slope equals to di by dy is equals to alpha 2 by alpha 3. Therefore, the LM curve would be positively sloped. All the points lying above the LM curve depicts points of excess supply, while points lying below the LM curve represents the point of excess demand. All the points on the LM curve are the points where money market clears, that is, money market is in the equilibrium. In order to look for the equilibrium of both goods market and money market, we plot both IS and LM schedules. Based on the Keynesian assumption that the interest rates respond to the money market and national income responds to the goods market, one can understand the mechanism through which the economy will settle down at the equilibrium where IS and LM schedules intersect at point E. Point E provides the corresponding equilibrium level of interest rate I star and income Y star. Keeping expected rate of inflation constant, the following will happen. An expansionary fiscal policy with unchanged inflationary expectations would shift the IS schedule outwards to IS dash. As a result, both income and interest rate would rise. This is depicted by a new equilibrium E dash. With expansionary monetary policy, LM would shift outwards to LM dash, leading to a fall in interest and a rise in income. This is depicted by a new equilibrium by E double dash. Both the above impacts are only explaining the way the policy instruments are incorporated in the model and provide a misleading picture if expected rate of inflation pi e is kept constant while rate of inflation pi is changing. Now let us study the aggregate demand schedule. To derive AD schedule, we express IS curve as interest rates in terms of real income and further substitute for I in the LM equation. IS schedule I is equals to alpha naught plus y by alpha 1 plus pi e. LM schedule mu minus pi is equals to alpha 2 log y minus alpha 3 I minus m minus p minus 1. Using the I from the IS schedule as and substituting in the LM schedule and rearranging, we get pi is equals to mu plus m minus p minus 1 minus alpha 2 plus alpha 3 by alpha 1 into yd plus alpha 3 into alpha naught by alpha 1 plus alpha 3 into pi e. From the previous relationship, AD schedule defines a negative relation between rate of inflation pi and YD, that is aggregate demand. An increase in the rate of inflation reduces the real quantity of money in the economy, creating excess demand in the money market. This would further make nominal interest rate to rise. With expected rate of inflation held constant, real interest rate also rises, reducing investment and hence aggregate demand. Further, a change in fiscal policy will shift the AD schedule without changing its slope. M minus P minus 1, that is the real money demand, in the last period will keep changing so long as the rate of growth of the money and rate of inflation are not equal. An increase in expected rate of inflation pi e will shift AD schedule by alpha 3 times the change in pi e. At any given level of income, this will also increase pi by alpha 3. Therefore, the expected inflation pursues actual inflation. Next, we will study the AS schedule under dynamics of inflation. AD alone cannot determine the optimal values of rate of inflation pi and income or output y. Aggregate supply schedule shows the combinations of rate of inflation pi and income y appropriate with production conditions in labor market. This involves two key components like an aggregate production function indicating total output produced by labor input. Secondly, it reflects labor market supply and demand conditions relating labor supply and demand to the rate of inflation. Next, we will study the production function. It is defined as the relationship between the output produced and the inputs used. A specific form of production function can be assumed as Ys is equals to beta 5 plus beta 6 L plus beta 7 K, where Ys is the natural log of the real output supplied and is equals to LNYS. N is the natural log of total labor input and K is the natural log total capital input. Beta 5, beta 6 and beta 7 are defined as the positive parameters. The above production function is in the form of Cobb-Douglas production function. Considering the short run equilibrium, the amount of capital is considered to be fixed or given exogenously. As a result, production function can be written as Ys is equals to beta 8 plus beta 6 L, where beta 8 is equals to beta 5 plus beta 7 K. Therefore, production function in the short run is a relationship between Ys and N, that is a relationship between output supplied and amount of labor supplied. This relationship is represented by a straight line with intercept beta 8 and slope beta 6. An increase in capital stock will shift the production function beta 7 times the increase in capital. Given is the figure of aggregate supply curve. Moving on to the labor market. The labor market again has two components, demand side and supply side. The demand for labor is inversely proportional to the real wage rate. The labor demanded by firms depends negatively on the real wage rate. L is equals to beta 9 minus beta 10 into W minus P, where W minus P is the natural log of real wage rate, while beta 9 and beta 10 are defined as positive parameters. The labor demand schedule is inversely related to real wages. Since wages and prices are rising continuously, the labor demand schedule can incorporate rates of changes in the form of L minus 1 is equals to beta 10 into W minus 1 minus bracket P minus P minus 1 bracket close. The above can be written as L is equals to L minus 1 minus beta 10 into W minus pi. L minus 1 is the labor demand in the previous period and W is equals to W minus 1. The amount of labor will rise only if wages are greater than the rate of inflation, that is W is greater than pi. This implies that the real wages would be falling over time. When W is equals to pi, the real wage will be constant. L is equals to L minus 1. Let us now study the aggregate supply schedule. The aggregate supply schedule, which is a relationship between rate of inflation and income, can be obtained by taking the difference in one lag period of the production function. Ys is equals to Ys minus 1 plus beta 6 into L minus 1. Substituting the change in demand for labor in two periods, in the previous we obtain Ys is equals to Ys minus 1 minus beta 6 into beta 10 into W minus pi. The above equation indicates that an increase in inflation rate with given wage rate would reduce the real wages and increase demand for labor given by the parameter beta 10. This demand for labor would produce more output as measured by the parameter beta 6, implying more production in the current period as compared to last period. Ys is greater than Ys minus 1. This results in positive relationship between rate of growth of real output Ys and rate of inflation, that is pi. The slope of the aggregate supply curve is given by 1 by alpha 4, where alpha 4 is equals to beta 6 into beta 10. The labor market is considered to be in equilibrium, W is equals to pi, implying that the rate of growth of real wages is equals to the rate of growth of prices. Then amount of labor demand in this period is same as labor demanded in the last year. This further means that the output as given by EQ 10, Ys is equals to beta 8 plus beta 6 L is independent of pi or W, that is rate of inflation and rate of growth of real wages. Therefore, the aggregate supply curve is vertical as shown in the figure. Now, we will move on to the overall equilibrium under dynamics of inflation. A complete overall equilibrium is a state when the goods market is in equilibrium, money market is also in the equilibrium, thus the aggregate demand derived from this situation intersects with the aggregate supply schedule to give the equilibrium level or combination of inflation rate and real income. Goods market is in equilibrium as reflected by IS curve. IS schedule. Yd is equals to alpha naught minus alpha 1 into I minus pi E. Money market equilibrium as reflected by LM curve. LM schedule. Mu minus pi is equals to alpha 2 log y minus alpha 3 I minus m minus p minus 1. Aggregate supply as given by AS schedule. Ys is equals to ye minus alpha 4 into pi e minus pi. Equilibrium conditions. Y is equals to Ys is equals to Yd. This overall system of equilibrium is depicted in the graph. The intersection of ISLM curve determines the equilibrium level of income Y and nominal interest rate I. On the other hand, the final intersection of AD and AS schedules. From IS schedule indicating goods market equilibrium, we can read real interest rate. As a result, we would be able to derive an overall equilibrium from demand side, which includes both goods market equilibrium and money market, and from the supply side. Thus, an intersection of aggregate demand AD curve and aggregate supply AS curve at point E results in equilibrium values of inflation and real income Y0, which reflects overall equilibrium of the economy. Next, we will study the long run equilibrium under dynamics of inflation. In the long run, an economy is left to itself would settle down with a specific combination of interest rate, real income and rate of inflation. Both the schools of thought, New Classical and Keynesian, agree on the notion of equilibrium but differ in their opinion when it comes to the point of time taken in adjustment. Keynesian argues that it takes long time for adjustment and reach a long run equilibrium, therefore it is necessary to intervene using fiscal and monetary policies. While New Classical economists argue that the economy is quite adjusting and it will attain a long run equilibrium. In the short run, the economy attains an equilibrium given by the following equation. y is equals to yd is equals to ys. Long run equilibrium is attained where pi is equals to pi e or y is equals to ye. If there arises discrepancy between output demanded and supplied, then an undesired movement in the inventories will take place, bringing about further changes in the output and employment. This process is assumed to be completed every time there exists short run equilibrium. Labour market may not be in the equilibrium in the short run, but in the long run it definitely attains equilibrium. The equilibrium is attained at real wage constant where labour supply is equals to demand. When expectations of inflation are fulfilled, there is no incentive to make any further adjustment in the economy and the economy will attain a stationary state. In the long run equilibrium, pi is equals to pi e, stating that expected inflation is same as current inflation. AS schedule becomes vertical, implying output is determined independent of demand, in the long run given Y or the real income. From IS and LM schedule, real money supply, that is M minus P, and real interest rate is obtained. I minus pi E is equals to alpha naught minus YE by alpha 1. In the above equilibrium, optimal levels of Y, pi, I are obtained sequentially. We observe output is determined by AS schedule, inflation is equals to the given rate of growth, money supply and interest is determined by the location of IS curve, AD curve intersects with AS curve at mu is equals to pi. As a result, long run equilibrium value of Y, pi and I are given by Y is equals to YD is equals to YS is equals to YE, pi is equals to mu is equals to pi e, and I is equals to alpha naught minus YE divided by alpha 1 plus mu. Given the figure shows the long run equilibrium in the economy. It should be noticed that aggregate demand AD plays no role in determining the income in the long run. It further indicates that the stabilizing policies of demand management like fiscal or monetary policies play no role in determining output or income in the long run. This equilibrium condition can only be affected if there are shocks either from the demand side or the supply side. Next, we will study the demand side shocks, aggregate demand or AD shocks. A demand shock occurs when factors influence the aggregate demand curve. An expansionary monetary policy in IS-LM framework would lower nominal rate of interest and increase output, but this will not occur in the long run equilibrium. An increase in the rate of growth of money from mu naught to mu 1 will shift LM curve outward to LM dash, but in the long run equilibrium, the rate of inflation must equal the higher money supply growth rate, that is mu 1. Hence, the IS curve must shift to intersect the new LM curve and attain YE as the equilibrium. As a result, interest rates should be higher by the amount of increase in the rate of growth of money supply. However, we observe that IS curve with pi e is equals to 0 does not change. This would imply real interest rate will not change. The real money supply initially increased as mu 1 is greater than pi, but LM curve starts retreating as rate of inflation exceeds the rate of growth in money supply. Therefore, the central bank started with larger growth of money supply, but the economy ended with lower value of cash balances. This is the only real variable that has been affected by the growth rate of money supply. In the long run, equilibrium rate of inflation must be equal to higher money supply mu 1. IS curve would therefore shift since pi e is equals to mu 1 in order to attain equilibrium at YE. Interest is higher by the amount of increase in the rate of growth of money supply. The real money supply increases initially since mu 1 is greater than pi, but as LM curve starts shifting back, as a result, rate of inflation exceeds rate of growth of money supply. Finally, one can conclude that initially central banks started with larger growth of money, but the economy ended with lower value of real cash balances. Next, we will study the supply side shocks, aggregate supply or AS shocks. A supply shock occurs when at every wage rate the supply of labor falls. This can occur due to the factors like increase in non-wage income or an increase in preference for leisure. This shock shifts AS schedule to AS dash, that is towards left hand side. The output would consequently fall to Y1E. If AD curve does not shift or reduces, then this would lead to excess demand and further increasing the rate of inflation. However, rate of money supply has not changed. Rate of inflation must remain same as before, and as a result, AD will shift towards left to AD dash. This new aggregate demand curve AD dash intersects with AS dash schedule, leading to new equilibrium E double dash. As a result of this AS shock, LM curve is also affected. The supply shock of reduced labor supply, output or income would be lower, and this will result in fall in transactional demand for money. This means for some time rate of inflation remains higher than the rate of growth of money in order to reduce the value of money. The final equilibrium E dash is achieved, both and I pi E will be higher. This higher real interest rate will reduce some amount of aggregate demand, resulting in lower equilibrium output. Let us now summarize what we have learned in this module. AD schedule defines a negative relation between rate of inflation pi and YD. An increase in the rate of inflation reduces the real quantity of money in the economy, creating excess demand in the money market. This would further make nominal interest rate to rise. With expected rate of inflation held constant, real interest rate also rises, reducing the investment and aggregate demand. Aggregate supply schedule shows the combinations of rate of inflation pi and income YS appropriate with production conditions in labor market. This involves two key components like an aggregate production function indicating total output produced by labor and capital input. Secondly, it reflects labor market supply and demand conditions relating labor supply and demand to the rate of inflation. An intersection of the aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve results in the equilibrium values of inflation and real income, which reflects overall equilibrium of the economy. In the long run, an economy is left to itself would settle down with a specific combination of interest rate, real income and the rate of inflation. Both the schools of thoughts, Neoclassical and Keynesian, agree on the notion of equilibrium but differ in their opinion when it comes to the point of time taken in adjustment. In the long run, equilibrium rate of inflation is equals to expected rate of inflation, that is pi is equals to pi E. AS schedule becomes vertical, implying output is determined independent of demand. AD plays no role in determining real income Y. Therefore, the demand management policies, namely the fiscal and monetary policies, plays no role in determining the income in the long run. Supply shock occurs when at every wage rate the supply of labor falls. This can occur due to the factors like increase in non-wage income or an increase in the preference for leisure. This shock shifts AS schedule to AS dash, that is towards left hand side. The output would consequently fall to Y1E.